Welcome to the second webinar in the MyPortfolio webinar series. Today we are going to talk about basics of administering a school on MyPortfolio. After we've learned about the MyPortfolio mindset 2 weeks ago with Pascal, who was our first presenter and facilitator in this webinar series. At the end of the session, I will give you an outlook of the two following sessions that are going to be held during term 1. And then we are also going to continue the webinar series into term 2. But today, we instead of focusing on the students or on teachers using MyPortfolio, we would like to focus on the administrators because they are equally important and therefore also need to know a number of things and about using MyPortfolio, how to deal with certain functionality in there. And therefore, this session is for the administrators or those that are going to be administrators. And I already see that a number of you filled in the poll that you can see here on the screen. So to get started, I would like to know from you whether you are already an administrator for your school on MyPortfolio, whether you are not an administrator or whether you are going to be one soon. So all you need to do is click on one of the radio buttons that you can see in the poll. And once we have a few more responses, I will broadcast the results. And then we can take a look at them. Okay, so there are still a couple of people missing who have not voted, but nevertheless, let's take a look at them. So currently, 2 people are already administrators for their school on MyPortfolio. 3 are going to be administrators very soon. So these might be people who either have already started using MyPortfolio or are going to sign up. And the third question, or the third option is that we've had 1 person who is not an administrator. Waina, that is a very good question that you just posted in the chat, because you say you are unsure of who should be an administrator, classroom teacher or admin staff. This is a good question because there are a number of things that administrators can do. And so usually administrators can be teachers, but not every teacher should be an administrator for a school on MyPortfolio. Because what we are going to look at, and we are going to cover that throughout the session a bit, and you'll most likely see kind of who would be a good person to be an administrator. In general, I would say a very experienced teacher who's also interested in the software and knows his or her way around it should be an administrator and not necessarily just admin staff in a school, because you might also have to make some content decisions in terms of who should have access to a portfolio in the grand scale, or what you would like to be able to do. And so it is often a good balance that you have somebody who is an administrator who knows the insides and outsides of portfolio work. But then on the other hand, you could also have an admin staff member who takes care of more mundane activities such as creating users or checking users for objectionable content. But let's get started. Why are we actually having this session on basics of administering a school on MyPortfolio? Well, every school in New Zealand has access to MyPortfolio for free, and this service is provided by the Ministry of Education. But because currently we already have 1,400 schools in MyPortfolio and quite a lot of users, so over 85,000 active users, that can make for a lot of administrative overhead and also for a lot of organization around who can access it, who should get accounts, and the like. And therefore, in order to provide this service for free to schools, the ministry decided to make this a team effort. Meaning that it is not up to the ministry to take care of user management and dealing with individual questions, but that a lot of these things are then also taken care of by the schools themselves, and in that regard, oftentimes also by an administrator. So what we are going to look at in the next few minutes is your obligations if you are an administrator of a school on MyPortfolio. And I'm speaking of just one administrator here, but often it is good practice to have 2 or 3 administrators available on MyPortfolio in case one of them goes on vacation or is out sick or cannot deal with an issue or with the student immediately, and therefore somebody else could get in instead and deal with the question on hand. So your obligations are primarily user management. User management is handed over to schools on MyPortfolio because it is found that schools know their users best and therefore also know who should have access to MyPortfolio and who shouldn't. So new students can be added, old students can be removed from an institution, and then also teachers added, teachers made staff members on MyPortfolio and the like. And because you know who is going to your school, this is a very good task for schools to take care of instead of handing that over to the ministry. Part of the user management is then also dealing with objectionable content. And that means if a student happens to upload a video or a photo or write something in the text that is not appropriate to display to others, then this content can be reported in the system and administrators receive a message about it. And then we expect the school administrators to deal with that. Oftentimes what we do, and with we I mean the site administrators of MyPortfolio, is that we send a follow-up message to the MyPortfolio administrators of the school where the student goes to, so that we are sure that they have also seen that notification. And therefore, it is really important that you keep your admin information up to date, including also having correct email addresses so that you can also receive these notifications. And keeping admin information up to date means that you really only have administrators in your system that are still current members of your staff and not a teacher that has already left your school and could not be bothered taking care of the user management anymore. Because whenever you click onto a school name on a student's portfolio or on a teacher's portfolio, you will be taken to a page that looks similar to this one here, where you can see the school name and then also the institution administrators and also staff members of this institution. And there you can send an institution administrator directly a message, and that's what we would do in order to get in touch with the school and just point out that a student has uploaded content that the school should be dealing with. Clear? Yes, we are recording this, so if you do happen to duck out earlier, you can come back to this later and watch it again. And we will put the link into myportfolio.school, into the discussions group on the page for this session, so that you can look at that quite easily. So going back to the contact information for institution administrators, it is very important that you do have the correct email address in the system so that it is possible for us to actually contact you. And in regards to objectionable content, schools handle that quite differently. Some schools suspend user accounts for a day or 2 days or an entire week. Other schools just talk with the students and ask them to remove the content that they've uploaded that other students or teachers find offensive and have a conversation about irresponsibility with those students. And some teachers also make it an entire class discussion so that other students also learn about the potential of difficulties by uploading something that is not really appropriate. So we've talked about two things. Now the user management, so creating accounts or dealing with student accounts, then dealing with objectionable content. And a third of the obligations for a school on MyPortfolio is also that they are the first level support. And that means that when students have initial questions of how to do something, or if they don't know where they have their password, and you might have to reset it, that this is done within the school and not taken to the site administrators or to the ministry altogether. That simply helps us to keep the costs for MyPortfolio also where they are and not increase them. And you're then also getting more familiar with the software and can support your students directly and more quickly than we would be able to do that from the site administrator side of things. Okay, so now let's take a quick look at some of the settings that you as site administrator can set when you're first starting out on MyPortfolio. Because it is really important, in my opinion, to set up your institution correctly directly from the start, so that all your students have a very good experience and can then start with it directly without too many stumbling blocks. So on the following screens, we are going to look at the administering institution screen, which you can find under administration and then institutions. Usually you should only have access to one institution there because you're usually only a member of one school. And so the first things on this screen are the institution display name. So that is what people will see around the site when your school pops up. And also the expiration date. Normally, we leave that not set. So the really important things are coming now, namely the authentication plugins. You can authenticate through a number of ways to MyPortfolio. The simplest is just to have internal accounts, and you can then also allow your students to register. However, if you are set up with single sign-on, for example, through Watchdog or Norcom or other providers, then you can let us know about that, and we can set you up with SSO on MyPortfolio as well, so that you can use the same credentials that you use for logging into any of your other school software. And when you go to the institution screen yourself, you do not actually see these authentication plugins because a site administrator will need to set those up for you. I'm just showing them to you here so that you can see what it looks like and what information we then also need in order to set up the authentication methods for you. So SSO is possible. If you do not happen to have a single sign-on via SAML, which is the preferred method here in New Zealand schools, you could also connect via LDAP or Active Directory and provide us with the relevant information so that we can set the authentication up properly for you, and you can then use the regular logins again with your students and your staff members. The nice thing about LDAP is also that we could perform a user synchronization and also a group synchronization. That means that whenever a new user is added to your LDAP directory, their account would be automatically synchronized into MyPortfolio, and then they could also become members of a group automatically. A third possibility of using an authentication method is by using Moodle as authentication authority. Because what you can easily do is take Mahara, on which MyPortfolio is built, hook it up to Moodle, and then you get Mahude. And Mahude is the name for the possibilities for connecting Moodle with Mahara and therefore also MyPortfolio, because it allows you to send content from Moodle directly into the ePortfolio. And content that is, for example, forum posts, that can also be entire forum discussions these days. But you could also send files directly from Moodle to MyPortfolio, files that students have uploaded in assignments, or you can also upload other items depending on what Moodle allows you to upload as well. And the nice thing is you do not have to export forum discussions or forum posts first to your computer and then upload them again to MyPortfolio, but students can perform these steps on their own by just clicking on Export to Portfolio in Moodle, and then everything will be transferred into their portfolio. So if we go back to the administration of the institutions, if you decided to go with internal authentication, then you can also decide whether you allow your users to register themselves or whether you want to register them either by creating accounts for them manually or by uploading a CSV file. Registration allowed is a very nice thing because then you only need to approve the user accounts. But for that, it is very important that you leave the confirm registration tick on. And during one of the future updates of Mahara very soon, we will actually disable this functionality on MyPortfolio so that you cannot tick the confirmation off. And that is just a security measure so that we ensure that only students and teachers from New Zealand schools access MyPortfolio and that not somebody from a different country or from another organization creates an account and then is let into the system. We do have a number of exceptions for users that can also register on MyPortfolio, and that is in particular organizations that support teachers or also students in their learning and teaching. So for example, the University of Auckland School of Education, University of Canterbury School of Education, University of Waikato Faculty of Education, and some other providers also have access to MyPortfolio so that the teachers in training can also start creating their portfolio directly in the environment that they will then also be using with their students once they move to schools. Another aspect that we can now look at is how you, and that is all on the same page, is how you can customize the experience and what you see on MyPortfolio. And so the first and very easy thing is for you to upload your school logo to the site. It is preferable to be in approximately the same size that the MyPortfolio standard logo is, just to ensure that the header does not really get too large. In addition, you can also choose a theme from the ones that you can see in the list. And so there are a number of built-in themes, but there's also the configurable theme available, which allows you to make changes to the colors of the standard theme so that you can also have your school colors there, have a banner in the color that you prefer, links in your school colors, and customize it more to the needs that suit you best. If you would like to have a custom theme so that a special background is applied, or that you do not have to change the colors yourself, this can definitely build for you and then be uploaded to MyPortfolio and made only available to your school on it, so that you can have a look that is very similar either to your learning management system or also to your school website. For a few months now, you've also been able to decide whether you would like to work with a drop-down navigation or with the tabbed navigation. And that refers to the top navigation on the screen. Because right now, standard MyPortfolio is set up so that you have tabs. But if you have a drop-down navigation, then that might be more comfortable for especially older students and also staff members to use. So now we've allowed it so that any institution can make the decision on their own whether they would like to have tabs or drop-down menus. We've made this decision because during a focus group session, we heard that all the students and also staff members prefer the drop-down menu, whereas primary school teachers thought it would be better if their students were still able to actually use the tab navigation, simply for easier navigation around the site. And that's why this feature is available to you, and you as institution administrator can decide what you would like to have there. Another very new feature, also from October, is that you can now have page skins. So we've already looked at that you can change the theme for your entire institution, but page skins would allow your students and your teachers to make changes to their pages themselves and decide on other backgrounds, decide on the colors they would like to have displayed when somebody views their page, and also what font size or what font they would like to use for headings and or also for regular text. This is a very nice feature for further customizing the look and feel of your institution and also of the portfolio pages that are created within. Next on the list for administering your institution is also that you can decide who should be seen in the online users bar of the people who are currently online on the dashboard page. Because MyPortfolio is being used by a lot of very different organizations, from primary schools all the way up to faculties of education in tertiary institutions, it is important to be flexible in who can see whom and can easily connect to them. And so one very good way is to say in the online users bar only that you would that people in your institutions, users in your institution, should only be able to see other users of the institution, so that primary students can directly only see everyone who's in their school, and then further on, not more than that. It is still possible that everybody gets access to everybody else by searching for them, but the default setting is always that you search first in your own institution, so in your own school, and not across MyPortfolio in general. And this drop-down menu where you have the choice of showing everyone who's currently online, showing only those users from your institution, or not showing anybody at all, is a choice that you can make and decide how much freedom you want to give people to see directly who is online in the very same moment that they are. Another new feature that you might have already seen if you've been to your site institution administration lately is that you can now decide to have a default license and also require license information when students create content and also upload content to MyPortfolio. And here you can also decide what the standard license should be, so that this is applied for the students directly when they join your institution. But of course, because a license can change depending on the content that somebody provides, this is just a default setting. And students could override that with their own settings in their account settings page directly and put their own default setting there. We've implemented this feature because it is a nice way of honoring copyright and making sure that everything that has been uploaded has been attributed correctly. And this is just an easy way to always have it on the default license that you normally use, and then change it only for those items that have a different license. Another area that we can look at exactly also on the same page is the default quota. And that is something that you as institution administrators are not able to change because that is only available for site administrators. But just to let you know, all students and also staff members on MyPortfolio receive space for up to 1 gigabyte and can upload any number of files for that. If we are looking at our hardware on our computers, 1 gigabyte might sound like not really a lot, but it actually is quite a bit because especially if students reflect in journals or write text directly into MyPortfolio, then they are not going to use a lot of space. It is really primarily video files or audio files that require space to be used. And a number of schools these days use YouTube, private YouTube channels, or also Vimeo for these purposes, so that all videos are also kept in a central space that is school controlled and where schools can then also access it later on. But 1 gigabyte of space is the general setting, and actually not too many people have yet reached that limit. But if you have a very active user, very active teacher who teaches many classes and needs to upload more than the 1 gigabyte, then it is definitely possible to let us know, and we can look into and reviewing the request for providing them with more space on MyPortfolio and make a decision based on the requirements of the teacher. Another setting that you can decide on as institution administrator now is whether you allow institutional public pages. That means that you can decide whether your students and also your staff members should be allowed to make their pages, their portfolio pages, public, so that these pages can be found by anyone around the world and can also be indexed by Google. Especially at the primary school level, schools may not want to do that in order to be more private and just make sure that students don't accidentally give access to their pages to the entire world. And therefore, you as institution administrator can decide whether you allow public pages or not. What you should keep in mind, though, is that if you do not allow public pages, then also your teachers will not be able to make any pages public, and it will also not be possible to share pages with parents that usually get pages shared through secret URLs. This is a trade-off. Maybe in the future development work, if it is requested, we could be changing it so that, for example, staff members who are identified as staff on MyPortfolio are able to share pages publicly, and maybe also that secret URLs can be created even though pages are not shared generally in public. And then the last item on this page is is the possibility for you to decide which fields in the profile information a student is allowed to change, or also a teacher for that matter. Because sometimes when you go onto MyPortfolio, you see that some students have pretty strange names and not really the real ones. And this is where you can decide now whether students can change any of their names and also could have a display name, therefore a nickname. So just by ticking these boxes, you don't allow students to make any changes to them. And in these cases, it is usually best when you create the user accounts yourself, upload them via CSV file, or hook up your system to a different one like a LDAP, single sign-on, or to your Moodle instance. The setting up info OAINA is Every school needs to do that. A number of things on this page only site administrators can do. So the support team, in particular Craig Eves, who answers all requests of students wanting to enter MyPortfolio, will be asking a number of these questions during the setup, in particular around the authentication method, so that everything can be set up directly from the beginning. However, you can always come back to the settings page and make changes later on. So for example, if you allow public pages in the beginning, but then decide not to use public pages anymore, then you could disable it. Or do it the other way around. If you decide to not make any pages public in the beginning because you just want to ensure that everybody understands the permissions, then you could still allow them to be made public later on. Or you could also add another authentication method at a later point in time. That might, depending on who shall be able to access the portfolio then through which means, it might mean that we will have to make certain changes in the user accounts, just to ensure that everyone can still log in properly and does not get two accounts created. So I just give you a couple of, a few seconds to think about if you have any questions for these general institution settings before continuing with another part of the administration. And Pascal, please feel free to jump in also at any time on the microphone and add your thoughts of some of these settings that we are discussing.
Hi, can you all hear me? I am Pascal. Thank you, Christina. Just a thing that is usually really popular with this side of administration has been the customization with the upload of the logo. A lot of schools have worked around this, and it looks really good, and the students know that their work is also for their school work, so it gives them yet another sense of belonging in the school and working on their digital competence within the school. So that's one thing that is really interesting. And another thing from experience is, as you mentioned, Christina, the 1 gigabyte is usually sufficient, as people are using a range of tools across the web as well, and using MyPortfolio to put things together from different places on the web. So that's that. And if there's any question, I can also take them in the chat as Christina takes us to the next part of the webinar. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Pascal. And Pascal, I believe in term 2 or 3, we will actually have a session on embedding content directly into MyPortfolio and showing the possibilities there, and going more into details. And that will be interesting, especially in regards to building a portfolio. But we are not looking at that today because that is not part of administering a school, but will definitely come at a later point. And Pascal, if you wanted to, you can also put in the link to your presentation, actually, I think, from Maharahui last week, if somebody already wants to follow up with that. Okay, it seems that there is no other question at the moment. So let's continue and look at some of the user administration points that I would like to simply highlight for you that you can then explore further. And later on in the webinar, we'll also be giving you some links where you can go to and learn more about administering your institution and also finding some help. So stay tuned for all of that. So now we are in the user administration of the institution administration, which you can reach by clicking on administration when you're directly or when you're logged into MyPortfolio, and then you're taken automatically to the user tab. And the first page you see here is the user search. This user search has changed a little bit over the last updates, and we've added some more information there so that you have more possibilities on finding users quickly, on really ensuring that you're looking at the right people, and then just dealing with their user accounts. And so one nice thing now is that sometimes you may want to know who has actually been logging in during the last week, or who has not logged in at all, and who has logged in only before a specific date. And you can do that now on MyPortfolio by simply going to the drop-down menu of the filter by login date options and choosing the time frame in which you would like to see who has been logged in and who has not. So that's an easy way for an administrator to see whether people were actually active during a period that they were supposed to work on their portfolio, but maybe said that they weren't really there. And once you have clicked on that filter by login date or any of the other options above, so also by just searching for the first name or the last name of a user, then you can view the results in the resulting table. And there you have the profile icon, the first name, last name, display name, if users have any, their username, their email address, the institution they belong to. So this column is in particular of interest for administrators who administer multiple institutions. Then the authentication method, the last login. The authentication method, again, is usually only interesting if you are using more than one authentication method. So, for example, if you have your MyPortfolio set up to use single sign-on via SAML, but also the login via Moodle. And then you can just review very quickly whether all users are on the correct authentication method. The last column that you see here, all the way to the right-hand side, with the all and none checkboxes, there you can select your users and then perform additional actions with them. Namely, if you have more than 10 users, you can also see the results per page and increase the numbers so that you don't have to go through a lot of sites and pages to find the correct users. But now going back, once you have selected users in the right-hand column, you can then perform actions with them. When you go to the Edit button, you can suspend all of the selected users, you can delete eventually all selected users, and you can also change their authentication method. And that is a nice thing if you first were on internal authentication, but then want to switch to a different authentication method, but the login details still stay the same. The next button to the right of it is the Get Reports button. And this button allows you to view more information about your users. On this page, you can then just also export all your users if you need to make any changes to them. So, for example, change email addresses or change their names. And you can also see for all the people that are selected, which pages they have in their portfolio and with whom they have shared these pages. However, that does not mean that you as administrator have access to these portfolio pages immediately. You only see their title and you can review the sharing permissions. This is a nice thing because that way you do not have to masquerade as the user all the time in order to troubleshoot their portfolios, or when they say, well, I've shared my page with my teacher, but she still cannot look at it. That's when you can just select the student in question, click on the Get Reports button, and then you'll see a list of all the pages that are in their portfolio and with whom they have shared them. And also under the user menu, you can then add users either manually or by using a CSV file. What we will be putting into the resource section for this administration webinar is a sample CSV file that you can use in order to upload your users. The information that you need for that is just a username, the first name, last name, email address, and a password. And you can also, that can be a relatively simple password because you can during the upload, can decide whether your users should then need to change their password once their account has been created. So now I've already mentioned that you can masquerade as a user. And masquerading means that you can log in as another user into their portfolio in order to troubleshoot it. And so all you need to do is click on their username in the user search screen, or you can also go to their profile page and click on the login as link. And then you will be asked for a reason why you want to log in as that user. This again is a fairly new feature in MyPortfolio because we found it very important to respect the privacy of all users on the platform, because they might be having some confidential information in there, and therefore it should not be the case that administrators can just log into any user account and look at what users have done. And this is in particular important when, for example, a teacher is the administrator of a school on MyPortfolio, but at the same time that MyPortfolio is being used for teacher appraisal purposes. Because if you think about it, that would mean that this teacher who is an administrator can log into any other teacher's account within that institution and can look at what they have written for their appraisal, can review any private feedback that a principal or deputy principal might have given, and therefore that is not really the purpose and not really good, because then confidentiality and also privacy concerns can come to play. And therefore, whenever any administrator wants to log into a user account, they need to provide a reason. And this reason is then also sent as a notification to the user into whose account an administrator logs in. So usually when we need to troubleshoot somebody's portfolio and really need to go into their account, then we write a short note into the reason field, just letting them know why we are going into their account. And oftentimes that also only happens after having talked with the user and having received their consent. But if something needs to be dealt with immediately and very quickly and we cannot get a hold of the user, then we'll definitely write a explanatory note in there, just letting the user know why we have been into their account, so that if they have any questions afterwards, they can contact us. And that is also a reason why we always need correct email addresses for users in the system, because most users have set their accounts so that they receive email notifications and therefore do not need to go into MyPortfolio directly in order to see whether somebody has written them a message. And yes, Pascal, this is absolutely correct. The masquerading feature should only be used sparingly to avoid any issues and any questions from users, be that students or teachers, especially if they think that some content was lost, that somebody tampered with their portfolio. And therefore, a lot of times the questions come about for giving somebody access and not really knowing whether a teacher can view a portfolio. And that is where you can use the user search and then the get reports functionality in order to review the access permissions quite easily. Now, Since we are looking at user administration, there is also sometimes the question of suspending users versus deleting users. Because when a user does something that has not been right, or you say you don't want that student on the platform anymore, or a teacher leaves your institution, then what do you do with it? Do you suspend the account or do you delete it? Well, we usually opt for suspending. Suspending allows you to reactivate the account, but while an account is suspended, the user is not allowed to log in. So all their content is still there, their portfolio is still there, but they are not allowed to go into their account, and usually nobody can see their portfolio pages either. And this is a nice functionality because when a student did something objectionable, you might want to reactivate their account later on. But of course, they should not necessarily have to recreate their portfolio, and therefore the account should only be suspended. Now, if a student leaves your school, do you suspend them, do you delete them, or what do you do? Normally, you would only remove them from your school on MyPortfolio, and you can do that on the user accounts page, or you can also do it in bulk by going to a different screen, namely under institutions and then members, and can then click on their user and remove many users at once. You would also not really delete a user when they leave your institution and also or when a teacher switches schools, because when you delete a user, all their content is gone. Their entire portfolio is gone and cannot be recovered unless we go to the backup files that we have from the server and retrieve it through a pretty much highly complicated process, which also then takes time to get the backup files. But we also do not keep backup files for an unlimited period of time. So if you accidentally deleted a user, we would need to know as soon as possible and then work out whether we can recover that user and also what costs would be involved with that. The nice thing about MyPortfolio is that everybody who is in the school sector can stay onto it as long as they are working at a school or going to school. And that means normally that you do not delete students who leave your school or teachers who leave your school, because they might be going to another school after yours and therefore should have the possibility to continue working with their portfolio and not having to start recreating it. So they would also not have to export and back up their portfolio and then import it back into MyPortfolio, but they could easily just change institutions. And this is something that we are going to look at during the advanced session of administering a school on MyPortfolio, because today we are just going to look at the basics. And sometimes there are some things to take into consideration when removing users from your institution. But normally you would only have to kick them out of your institution, but leave their user account intact. And removing users from your institution is also an obligation for you as institution administrator, because as long as a user is a member of your school on MyPortfolio, you are responsible for them. So whenever they do something wrong or whenever they have a question, they should be coming to you first. Now you might ask the question for how long can a user stay on MyPortfolio once they have left your school? Currently, there is no time limit attached to that, but eventually the Ministry of Education might give a more strict time frame in the sense of that somebody who is not attached to a school on MyPortfolio or to a support organization might only have access for 6 months or 12 months or 18 months. but that decision has not yet been made. So currently, students and teachers who are being removed from an institution on MyPortfolio can still keep their portfolio until we contact them. And yes, Pascal, suspending is a very powerful feature that can be very good for driving positive digital competence, because the students see and really also feel the effects of their wrongdoing when their account is suspended and suddenly they cannot really talk to fellow students, cannot really post on MyPortfolio and engage with it or give feedback on other portfolios. And that is why we are not policing MyPortfolio much, but we usually leave it up to the schools of how they want to deal with the students. What we do look at is that objectionable content is dealt with, and also if we regard it as offensive, that we also follow up with the schools in making sure that this content is removed. But we are not saying we are suspending a student's account, or we are deleting the account, or we are limiting the functionality on MyPortfolio only because a few students do something wrong, because the majority is actually using the system very well. And so instead of shutting down functionality, limiting the scope of what you can do on MyPortfolio, we are of the belief that it is better that you discuss any issues with the students, make them aware that they have done something wrong, because sometimes they may not really realize that, and really talk to them about digital competence, digital literacy, and also e-responsibility. And there are a number of resources available in New Zealand that you can use in order to talk with the students about that. Now that we are coming already to the end of our webinar on the basics of administering a school on MyPortfolio, we would like to show you a few of the, kind of point you to a few of the resources that are available to you where you can seek help. Because administering MyPortfolio kind of comes with a number of tasks. Some are small, some are medium-sized, and some are actually big. And so in order for you to make the best of it, there are a number of support channels available to you. The first one is the Mahara user manual. And we are also putting the links into the chat. But eventually, we will also make the presentation available so that you can then later on also click directly onto the links. By the way, clicking on the link in the chat window will open up a new window so that you're not kicked out of the session. So you can safely click on any links that you see in the chat without having to fear that you won't be able to come back to the session. So the Mahara user manual is available online as HTML version, but you can also download it to your tablet or smartphone as EPUB file. And we also have a PDF version of slightly over 350 pages available. I prefer the HTML version because it allows you to search the entire manual with the full text search. Just here on the left-hand side where it says quick search, so that you can find whatever you're looking for easily. And the manual includes a lot of screenshots so that you can refer back to these screenshots and look at your own screen and see if you see exactly the same thing. We do have a link to the user manual included directly on the homepage of MyPortfolio so that you can always access the current version very easily. Currently, MyPortfolio uses Mahara 1.8, and this is the version that you'll be accessing when you go to manual.mahara.org. Another way where you can, or another channel where you can seek help is the MyPortfolio discussions group. This group has been established at the beginning of 2011 because we wanted to allow everyone to get in touch with other teachers, discuss issues, look at features, and so on. And this group has a number of forum discussions where you can learn about new things that are coming up in my portfolio, events that are being held in regards to e-portfolios, and where you can also report any bugs or issues that you encounter and ask for our help so that we can get back to you. And you can also learn when we will make updates to my portfolio and when there are outages. So these are the 3 forums in that group that I highly recommend for you to subscribe to, so that you are always up to date of what is going on my portfolio. But of course, there are also a number of other forums that you are very welcome to explore, and of course also post your own questions. We also have a MyPortfolio administrators group, and you are generally invited into that group when you become a new administrator on MyPortfolio. But if you're not invited, you're welcome to request membership. And this group is not as active as the MyPortfolio discussions group, but if you have very specific administrator questions that you think nobody else would really care about from teachers, then you're welcome to post them in here. If you have any very specific questions, for example, of setting up a authentication method or making certain changes that are specific to your school on MyPortfolio, you should be sending an email to support@myportfolio.school.nz, because then, in particular, Craig can answer your questions. But we do have the forums available because a lot of times people have the same questions, and so we want to allow others to see the answers, just all of them, instead of just one person. Now we are already coming to the end of our webinar. It is 4:45. Craig, if you have a question, you're welcome to post it in the chat or hold off just a second so that we finish the presentation, and then we can take your question, and others who might have to leave directly can leave the room. So now that we've been talking about basics of administering your MyPortfolio school, we would also like to point out the next upcoming sessions during term 1. And these are going to be next Thursday, again at 3:45. Student e-portfolios, what do these look like within MyPortfolio? And this session is held by Heath Sawyer. And then on the 10th of April, we'll have Pascal again with developing a school-wide plan for implementing MyPortfolio. If you have not already signed up for these webinars, you're welcome to do so by going to trainingservices.org.nz and just sign up for these sessions so that you can then participate in them. Now, if you have any questions in regards to the webinar series, please send an email to onlinesupport@myportfolio.school.nz and we can answer them. And if you have particular questions for me, then please also feel free to send me an email at christina@catalyst.net.nz, or you can also send me a tweet, and then we'll get back to you as quickly as possible. And now I can just say thank you very much for attending this webinar. We wish you all the best in either continuing to implement MyPortfolio, maybe reviewing some of the settings that you have in your institution administration, and then hoping to see you again in some other webinars, especially also any new users to MyPortfolio or those who are planning on using it, so that you have a very good idea of what is possible on the platform, not just from the administrative side of things, but also from the content side. And now, for anyone who has any questions, we'll still be here for a few minutes and can take those of you. And thank you very much for everybody for attending.